For our notes on government. Let's start off with this guy. You know this guy? Who is this guy? So this is, of course, the most famous terrorist in American history, Osama bin Laden, who was killed a number of years ago in a raid in Pakistan. Incredible story, actually, how we got him with two choppers, Navy SEAL Team 6. Fascinating stuff. But if you don't know this already, the reason we went in and got him, like with actual people on the ground and not just blowing up with a missile, do we know why? Why do we actually send Navy SEALs in to do the job? We could have just blown it up with a missile 1,000 miles away.
We wanted him alive.
Well, we didn't want him alive. We shot him in the face 3 times.
Make sure he's dead.
What's that?
Make sure he's dead.
So one is to make sure that he was really dead. We can confirm it with the body. The body, by the way, we took. We didn't leave it there. We took it on the chopper back to base. Why would we do that? What's that? Well, certainly we took photographic proof. Why didn't we want to leave the body there? Exactly. We're worried that he would be buried somewhere and that burial site would become like a holy site for terrorists to go and visit. We didn't want that. So in fact, where was this body eventually laid to rest? We dumped him in the ocean, so nobody could ever find him again. So all of this stuff happened a long time ago. But one of the things we did is that when we took his body, we also took all of his hard drives, a bunch of records and paper documents from his compound, so we'd know more about what was going on with Al-Qaeda. And we took other stuff too that's just now getting released. And this classified dump, which has happened over the last few weeks, we found out other things that bin Laden had. His personal effects were finally revealed to us. It turns out that Osama bin Laden had stuff on his computer as well, stuff not related to terrorism. And some of this was a little surprising, because it turns out he was a pretty big avid collector of PlayStation video games. He had a bunch of old video games on his computer, which you wouldn't expect a terrorist to have. He also had a history documentary on himself that showed on the History Channel several years ago. And then he was apparently a huge collector of American music. Now that's weird because it's a guy who condemns Western civilization and says we should all die terrible deaths, but apparently also a really big fan of Elton John. Would not have seen that coming, ladies and gentlemen. But by far the most prolific artist he had, the biggest fan of music he had on his computer, any idea? Katy Perry would be incredible. He was a huge fan of the Wu-Tang Clan, ladies and gentlemen. Let that sink in for a moment. Osama bin Laden and the Wu-Tang wouldn't have seen that coming. Fascinating, what we're learning about this guy after his death. Okay, moving on. Big stories for today. Donald Trump has announced over the last week or so that he wants to hold a parade. And parades in general, things that presidents will sometimes attend. You can see him here being Grand Marshal. I think it's the Thanksgiving Day parade several years ago. But the parade that Donald Trump is asking for is different than a normal parade because he wants a what? No? Nobody? Donald Trump is calling and planning, not asking for, but actually planning because he's in charge of this, for a military parade, ladies and gentlemen. To have tanks rolling down the streets, soldiers with guns, and that thing, you may not have thought about this before, that is not typically something we see in America. And apparently when he was inaugurated a year ago, he asked for tanks and missile launchers to be in his parade as he was made president back in January of this past year. The Pentagon turned him down and said, no, we're not really going to do that. But of course, the president is commander-in-chief. He can decide and make whatever orders he wants to. So here's my question to you. Why don't we do those things? You may have never thought about this, because other countries do military parades, and America doesn't at all. I have never seen a military parade in America.
Like dictatorship?
Yeah, exactly. So the thing is that countries that do military parades tend to be quite a bit different than ours. This is North Korea, famous for their military parades. Here is Russia, who also has big military parades. And these are not countries that are really known for their stellar democracies as a result of that. So, Brady, you okay? And so, essentially, the reason these countries do that is to show strength, to show power. Here is how great my military is. Here's why you should fear me and my country. Okay, yes. And America doesn't do those things. Why not? Why don't we show our strength, ladies and gentlemen?
Because you're already in the war, like in the world.
Yes, because no one else even comes close. And so if we look at military spending in my country, we've talked about this already. I've said we're the biggest, most powerful military in the world, but it's worth looking at the top 20 countries to see just how incredibly different we are than all of them. It is. It's not even close. There's no reason for us to show our strength if we are clearly number one already. And there's one other problem. One reason we don't do military parades. Parades, what do they require?
Money.
They take money, right. And a military parade of this size is estimated to be in the millions or tens of millions of dollars to show tanks rolling down the streets, or maybe America has other places to use that money. This is the mayor of Washington, D.C., and she said last week that Washington, D.C. will refuse to pay a dime towards this parade. They won't do it. So if Trump wants this, it has to come from federal money himself. Can Trump have a military parade if he wants to? He's the commander-in-chief. He's in charge of the entire military. If he wants to, it will happen. But the D.C. mayor said no. And the other problem is that if it does happen, some veterans have said that they will stand in the streets to protest it and block the way. If you can imagine a military parade where you have soldiers opposing it standing on the streets, what do you do about that? You're going to throw a bunch of military veterans out into jail? This is a chaos. It's going to be crazy. But as far as we know, it is still going forward. It is planned for November for what famous military holiday? Veterans Day, right. So we'll see, ladies and gentlemen. We won't be in class together, but wherever you are next November, pay attention. Maybe I'll wheel my projector and we'll do current events in your class next year. We'll see. All right, second story I have for you is about this country right here, the island of Puerto Rico. Now, Puerto Rico, if you don't know, got hit by a huge hurricane last year called Hurricane Maria, and it was devastating. This happened back when we were getting hurricanes left and right. We had one in Texas, we had one in Florida, and all of them were bad news, but Hurricane Maria was the worst of it. And part of this is because Puerto Rico is poor, and it just rolled through Puerto Rico, doing huge amounts of devastation in the billions of dollars. Here's Puerto Rico at night. You can see, like, from satellite, all the lights. The major cities, you can see that's San Juan, where I've been before, very nice city. And then here was Puerto Rico the day after Hurricane Maria. And essentially, you can tell, like, it knocked out 70 or 80% of their total power grid. And I don't just mean, like, the lights went out for a day. Like, they still don't have power in about half of the country. They have been unable to rebuild the power grid in Puerto Rico. So for the last 6 months, they have had no power in about half of the homes in this country. And it's compounded by this issue here. Do you know, people from Puerto Rico, are they U.S. citizens?
Puerto Rico is part of the U.S.
And it turns out 50% of Americans think the answer is no, and that is incorrect. Puerto Rico is an island territory of America. If you are born or live there, you are a citizen just like you and me, and people don't realize this. The bigger problem is that Puerto Rico is incredibly poor. The poorest state in America is Mississippi, and Puerto Rico makes even half of that. So the island people of Puerto Rico, while being Americans, are also kind of exempt from a lot of the protections and money that we have. So what we see here is, like, even in the coverage on the news, we saw a ton of coverage about Florida and then about Texas, and then no one's really covering Maria because it's happening kind of out of sight, out of mind. We aren't paying attention to it. Well, Donald Trump, when he reacted to Puerto Rico, did so in a strange way. He did talk about how the island had been devastated, but he followed this up in a second tweet by saying much of the island owes money to Wall Street and the banks. Essentially, after the hurricane, saying, you know what, they still owe a lot of money, they're going to have to pay that money back, which is a weird way of talking to a piece of America that had just been victimized by a hurricane. And then later, Donald Trump gave a press conference talking about the island, which was not entirely reassuring. At one point, saying this quote here, "This is an island surrounded by water, big water, ocean water," and then following up with another quote, says there's this thing called the Atlantic Ocean, this is tough stuff. And as we've seen over the last few months, recovery towards Puerto Rico has been slow, and relief has not gotten there very quickly. There's a lot of reasons for this happening. I'm not saying it's all Donald Trump's fault, but the people of Puerto Rico have been in real dire shape for the last 6 months ago. There are, back a month after it happened, 95% of people had no power at all. And this is the governor of San Juan, who is actually saying to America, I am begging for anyone to help us, to save us from dying. I remember this happened. This was absolute chaos when it was going on. And Donald Trump responded with his own tweet right here, in which he attacked the mayor of Puerto Rico, Mayor of San Juan, saying that she was doing a poor job. Now, this caused a great deal of friction between the two of them. And when he sent this tweet, it was made worse by the fact that Donald Trump sent it from his Mar-a-Lago golf course, which he was golfing on the weekend. And on the same day that he sent this tweet on the golf course, the mayor of San Juan was literally in the streets of her city trying to provide food and clean water to the people who live there. So this became this whole issue when the whole thing went down. And Donald Trump, at the end of the weekend, dedicated a golf trophy to the victims of the hurricane. But I don't know that everyone was really thrilled with that idea. I don't know what they're going to do. It's like 4 million people in one golf trophy. I'm not sure exactly how that helps them out. But I think the reason, one of the things I wanted to show you was that he actually went down to Puerto Rico a month later and handed out aid. And it's worth taking a look at. Oh no. Hold on. Where's my sound?
Oh, jeez.
Now bear in mind, this is an island where half the people have no power, a good deal of them are starving and have no clean water, and he's throwing like basketball layups of paper towels out to the people. Like it was not the look I think that Donald Trump was going for. But there you go. All right, we are still left with the idea that we don't know what to do. Puerto Rico still doesn't have power for about half their country. It will cost billions to rebuild it, and America has a responsibility to do so. But there are people. Okay, last story I have for you. This is a holdover from earlier this week. I did not have a chance to tell you my favorite story about Valentine's Day. Now, Valentine's Day goes back, as I said, 2,000 years. What I didn't tell you is that it comes from a man named Saint Valentinus, who was this old Latin priest back in the 3rd century. Now, I told you he was executed, and that's been kind of the end of it ever since, except Valentine's Day takes over an old Roman holiday. This Roman holiday was known as Lupercalia. And Lupercalia was essentially, this is the holiday they had in the Roman Empire, which slowly got supplanted by Valentine's Day on the same day. Lupercalia was a festival of fertility for both fields and for women to get pregnant and have babies, and it was named after the wolf, the lupus, the wolf. Well, the thing about Lupercalia, and we don't celebrate this today, but this is the origin of Valentine's Day, is that you would take several goats in the town square, you would then kill them, sacrifice the goats, and you would take the knives of blood and you would spread them over young boys' faces as the boys were supposed to laugh and chant covered in goat blood. And that was the beginning of the ceremony, because after that was over, then you would take the goats and you would flay them. You would essentially peel the skin off of the goats and turn them into these thongs, basically like little whips. And at that point, the young boys in the town square, and all of Rome did this, would strip down naked and cover themselves in oil. And at that point, they would also kill puppies. Not just dogs, they would kill young puppies as part of the sacrifice. And in doing so, once all of the animals had been killed, they would then take these leather thongs and they would run through the streets naked, trying to hit people. And the job was that you would run away from them and try not to get hit by these oily, naked men who were whipping you, right? So that is an incredible story and where Valentine's Day comes from, but you have to understand that while you're like, oh God, I wouldn't want to be whipped. No, actually people did want to be whipped, because if you got hit by one of these leather thongs, it meant you were more likely to be fertile, to have a good pregnancy and give birth. So in fact, women, while they would try to run away, would secretly hope to be caught. And the best thing you could do was to find a pregnant woman, run up to her, and whip her several times with a piece of goat skin in order to let her have a more healthy birth for her child. Now that is an amazing place in which Valentine's Day starts. It would actually be kind of more fun than the current holiday. But the best part of this whole story is that this whip thing that he's using that's made out of recently dead goat skin, the name for that in Latin is a februare. And the februare is where we get the name for the month. So in fact, when you think about the word February, it really comes from these magical baby-making goat thongs that we whip pregnant people with. It's incredible. How awesome is that? All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's current events for